curiously, I've been listening to a lot of George Orwell audio books, and it's amazing because there's these sort of huge passages where you think, oh my God, what incredible foresight, how amazing. And then there's other bits you think, oh no, that's not how it turned out at all. Like Hitler's not yet kicked off in like the road to Wigan Pier. He's going, I don't like the look of this Hitler bloke. I think he's going to be trouble. You think, yeah, quick, George, do something. You know. But then there's like a speculation about like how other things are going to pan out, and it's sort of like the sort of the necessity for socialism. He does point out that that socialism's requirement for mechanization and a mechanized utopia will fail, and I can't help but return to something that Gandhi said prior to the Indian Revolution that throughout the British, there's no point in overthrowing the British in order to simply replace them and their systems.
And Gandhi failed in this respect. I mean, Gandhi had a vision of turning India into this collection of agrarian autarkic utopias, and the only thing left of Gandhi's vision in the current Indian economy is his image on these rupee notes. That's the only thing left.
Yeah.
And this is partly because, Gandhi's analysis was inappropriate for the 20th century. You couldn't, it's a very nice vision to have India as a collection of agrarian utopias. It's just irrelevant to how the economy functions in the late 20th century.
But when you say functions, functions in order to suit the needs of the powerful. It would have functioned pretty bloody good for most agrarian Indian villagers. It just wouldn't have functioned well for the capitalist relationships that needed to be maintained, whether or not it was the British in charge or the Indians that were in charge.
Again, I don't know what exactly went wrong, but from the very beginning, certainly Nehru and the leadership did not try to implement Gandhi's vision in a serious way, largely because they also realized, it's not workable.
Because most people want power, ultimately.
First of all, they want food. And they couldn't...
Nehru had food. Nehru was never discussing whether or not he was going to have food. He's getting food.
No,
what he wants
not
is power.
Nehru personally.
The Indian people.
But when you have, you have 1 point something billion Indians to feed, then you don't have a lot of room for errors or for maneuvers in the economic field. Now, the amazing thing is that today in India, more people die from eating too much than from eating too little. Even in India, it's not just in the West.
Yeah.
So
for me, that's just a perversion. Like that's just that's mental. We need to. That's a
but
glaring
it also means
example
that there is
of
enough
terrible
food.
systems. Yeah. And so if there's not enough, so then we can abandon the idea that scarcity is the problem. Organisation is the problem. There's too much food here. There's not enough food over there. Why is the food not getting over there? It doesn't suit the interests of the powerful for the food to go over there. How do we affect the interests of the powerful? We organise ourselves and we challenge the interests of the powerful. Who are the powerful? It's these companies here. It's these governmental organisations
that's
here.
The key question. To know who are the powerful, where power is, and how does it function, it's very complicated.
Do you think that power is concealed, true power, without getting too conspiratorial?
Yeah, certainly in the modern world, for a couple of centuries, one of the main functions of power is to conceal power. There is kind of a law of history. If you don't have a lot of power, you try to exaggerate your power. If you have a lot of power, you try to conceal it. If you're a king in England in the 12th century, you don't have a lot of power. But you try to conceal your weakness by these extravagant displays of power. So you go with like a pile of gold on your head, and you wear all these furs and pearls, and every now and then you tell people, okay, cut off his head. And that makes people feel, oh, he's very powerful. But actually, he's very weak. Because the state is very weak. Then you move to the modern age, and leaders and governments really have enormous amounts of power, but they don't want to attract too much attention to it. So, they dress plainly, like an ordinary person. And they live in a much lower life. They don't go about telling people, okay, cut off his head. Because they don't want to draw attention to all that power.
That's a brilliant point.
It's very difficult to know where power really lies in the 21st century.
Pageantry conceals ordinariness. Our flags, our processions, all this pageantry, all this ritual, all this ceremony helps us to believe there is a United States of America. There is an England. It's not just a sort of an economic idea and a bit of land and some powerful people exploiting the vulnerable. It's a thing. It's a flag. There's an eagle. There's a symbol. There's a history. It's real. But bit by bit, you unpick and you unstitch and you discover there's nothing there except some powerful people exploiting some people without power. That is your America. That is your England. That is your Israel, your Saudi Arabia, all just myths and stories so that the powerful can continue to exploit the powerlessness, whether it's a crown on a head or some stars and stripes on a flag. So first thing that people have to be disabused of is their myths of nationalism, or then whatever myth it is that's preventing them from acting in their own interests.
No, it's more complicated than that.
It's more complicated than that, but we've got to get people moving.
Take, for example, the Arab Spring. So it all started off very optimistically. Like, wonderful, we have a democratic revolution of the people now gain power, and it was hijacked. And the Kalashnikovs were turned in the wrong direction. And we now have a much worse situation than before. I mean, Egyptians and Syrians and people in Yemen and in Libya, and they look back and we say, this is not why we had a revolution. Something really, really failed.
Yes, because I think they had no idea. The Islamic Brotherhood have an idea, whether you like the idea or you don't like the idea. This is our idea, this is how we see society, this is our vision. The people that are on Twitter don't have a vision for society.
That's why I think it's dangerous just to go out, say, on Twitter and tell people, okay, go to the street, take out the Kalashnikovs, fight against power. So you can have a week of revolution, but then if you don't really understand the actual power structure, then your revolution will be hijacked and directed towards goals which are not necessarily the best goals in the world.
For example, like Spain in the 30s, brief flicker of anarcho-syndicalism ultimately becomes fascism, becomes neoliberalism.
There are so many examples. I mean, a century ago in Russia, you had the Bolshevik Revolution, and within a very short time, you had Stalin and the gulags and so forth. And, by within 2 or 3 years, the Bolsheviks were firing on the workers and peasants that they were supposed to represent. You have the famous case of the Kronstadt sailors and the Kronstadt workers, which in 1917 were kind of the avant-garde of the revolution. And by the end of the revolution, the Bolshevik government was massacring the very same workers in Kronstadt, which in the beginning were the big heroes of the revolution.
It depends on whether you have an optimistic perspective or not. There's some days where I feel human beings are capable of creating this utopia. I believe it. I believe that this technology can be harnessed to create a world of justice and liberty. Then I'll hear like about some terrible refugee crisis in Burma, and I'll think, oh Jesus, let's just leave it as it is now. This is like, I don't want the trouble. I don't want the aggravation. But to return for a moment to the optimistic perspective, if you can identify the powerful, and you have a vision of a society that could be differently organized, this for me is 2 ingredients.
That's a big if. I mean, if you look today at the world, what strikes me most is that nobody, as far as I can tell, nobody in either the left or the right has any serious, meaningful vision for where humanity will be in 2050. Most of what you get is nostalgic fantasies about the past.
Yes.
But you don't have a serious vision which takes into account AI and biotechnology and climate change and all that, and really looks clearly at where can we be in 2050.